Okay, welcome everybody. Sorry about the slight delay. We've been waiting for YouTube to connect. We've now got connection. First things first, I have a statement to read, which is read before every council meeting these days. Welcome to today's meeting. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to be filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, follow me. The premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. First of all, before we enter the start of the meeting, there's a slight change on the agenda item. The final item, agenda item 8, should be updates on taxi enforcement, not reinforcement. We're not reviewing our taxes at this stage. It's only about enforcement. And 2, I would like to make a personal statement to thank so many of our taxi drivers who've come here tonight to listen to the debate and participate. I believe in some public participation. I want to make it quite clear at this stage that I salute you for the work you do in getting people home on cold nights such as this. So you do a fantastic job, and I appreciate all the work you do to getting people home safely on a horrible night such as this when the road conditions are not perfect. So thank you very much, and an appreciation from me. Any appointments of substitutes?
No substitutes this evening, Chair, thank you.
Okay, any declarations of interest? There being none. And we, I believe, I have 2 public participations.
That's right, Chair. We have Councillor Roberts wishes to address the committee and also Mr Hassan.
Mr Roberts, Councillor Roberts, you're free to go first.
Thanks very much. I'll be as brief as I possibly can. Councillor Cronin has warned me not to overrun, so I won't do that. In your papers, you've got notice that from June 22, all licensed drivers, private hire and Hackney, and private hire operators are subject to duties under the Qualities Act. And for my purposes, the main changes for me is that taxi and PHV drivers are required to accept the carriage of a disabled person, providing reasonable mobility assistance, and provide any disabled passenger with assistance to identify the vehicle at no extra charge. There are legitimate reasons for non-compliance, but drivers unable to meet these requirements for medical reasons need to apply to the council for exception. So why am I here? I've got somebody not in my ward, and there's some reasoning behind that, who's come to me a couple of times with problems. He and his wife enjoy coming down to the town in the evening, and his wife in a wheelchair. Earlier this year, he told me of the embarrassment he suffered when he tried to get the fare back and was passed down the line to 4, and then on the 5th, he got somebody who was willing to take them. More recently, he went for an evening at the Huntingdon's Hall, and on that occasion was actually directed to another taxi stand. So to go off and to get there. Now, I reported the first incident, but not with the details. And I accept that I was doing is just passing intelligence on. And the same with the second. Now, why might I do that, you might think, and why might he not report the matters with all the details that are available? First, can I say, the reason he couldn't use the person at the front of the rank, as it were, is because it seemed that the vehicles were unsuitable, some vehicles unsuitable without the logo, and then another driver was unable to understand what he wanted. Now, I know from Noel that there's quite a bit of anecdotal evidence of this sort of thing happening, but I have every sympathy, and I understand why it's difficult for there to be action if the information isn't passed, it is passed by a third person, as it were, and doesn't contain all the necessary details. But then you've got to ask yourself, why would that be? Why is this chap approaching me? And they will approach you, won't they? Why are they approaching me and not going to the proper route? Well, you've got to think about the embarrassment and indignity of being passed down a line of taxis to try to get, or sent somewhere else, and wonder if you've gone through that, would you want to be the one who has to then make the report, being very identifiable, or does it need something further? So I'm wondering whether the committee knows the full extent of the problem. I certainly don't. I don't use taxis very much. I stick to the bus. But whether they use the taxi, and I'll leave it to you, Chair, and the committee to decide whether there is a subtle way of managing so the person who's already suffered humiliation doesn't have to suffer further embarrassment by making the report. No recommendations from me. You're far more seasoned licensed officers than I am, or licensed councillors than I am, but I just bring the thing forward. Having reported it twice, I've now, in a way, I've got it off my guilty list, because it seems wrong for me just to sit at home and keep saying to them, like, yeah, well, I've told them about it. Something must be done. Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks to the committee for your indulgence.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Obviously, there's no opportunity at this stage for a response to be made to the comments you've made, but I will ask Mr McManaman to respond to the issues you've raised in his opening statement, if he can, when we come to the item later on the agenda. Obviously, we want to have the best quality service for taxi drivers in the city, and it's unfortunate that some people don't always get that. But let's face the facts, majority of taxi drivers do work hard and do help, and that's what we like to hear. But there will be a response to your comments later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Thank you, committee.
And I'm sorry, I've forgotten who was the next person.
Hello,
Of course, Andy, sorry, of course, Andy, you're welcome to stay to listen to the debate, but I know you've got somewhere else to go.
No, I'd like to stay to the very end and go over the snow.
I thought you might. Thank you very much, Andy. Sorry, thank you.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So I am here to represent the Worcester Taxi Driver Association. So the point is we are requesting for the age limit for last 2-3 meetings, and it's now a long time now. We've been waiting, and I'm hoping this should be finalized now. At the moment, we are on the 3 years old vehicle, but our demand is regarding to the current situation, circumstances, and if you go with the living costs, everyone is struggling. So as a trade, we are struggling too, and we can't afford that much. So our request is to look on it and make a good decision in the favor of the public and the drivers as well. And the second thing, we're still waiting for the Lowesmore bus lane, and because it's hard for the public paying extra money for going round and round, rather than not using the bus lane through Lowesmore. And that's more for the public interest. And another point is still waiting for the bus sign at the cathedral. And we are appreciating for the providing the enforcement. And we do request, we want this enforcement on the regular basis, not just for the festive time. So we're looking forward this to carry on the regular basis. Another thing we're looking forward for, to request you for the marshals. On Friday and Saturday, 11 till 4, should provide us some marshals there, so we can provide more better service. and can make people more happy as well. So that's, thank you.
Thank you very much for your contributions, and I know the issues you've raised have been discussed at the Taxi Forum and elsewhere as well. As you'll see from the agenda in front of us, the issue of age limits is on the agenda, and that'll be for members to determine and discuss later on. The issue of Lowesmore is a frustration for all of us. It's not in a position of our making, it's the position and responsibility of the County Council, who have jurisdiction over that, but we've made our position quite clear. We want that to be opened up for taxes as well. I see you, and I think this committee sees you, as public transport, and you should be given the same freedom as buses to use bus lanes, same as everybody else. With the sign of the bus, with the lack of the sign at the bus stop on the Cathedral, I think that's something which we will take up independently to make sure it will happen. I know there are some delays with Ringway erecting signage at the moment, but that's something we will investigate and come back to you and let you know what we can find out. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, public participation has ended. Minutes of the previous meeting are in front of you, members. Can I seek clarification that they're acceptable to you as a true-ish record? Agreed. Agreed. Thank you very much. Come on to agenda item 5 then. Draft licensing and environmental health fees and charges. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Evening. We're on page 5. It's agenda item number 5, as the Chairman has just mentioned. This is the draft licence and environmental health fees and charges review for 2023-24. So some background, members. This is an annual report which comes to this committee same time every year in December, so that you have the opportunity to view the Council's proposed fees and charges for the forthcoming year, and recommend that they are included in the Council's budget to take effect on the 1st of April 2023. Licensing fees are very much a matter for the Council. Worcestershire Regulatory Services advise senior officers in the Finance Office and also directors on appropriate fee setting for the forthcoming year. It is the role of the Council to review its fees and charges, so you have a responsibility to look at them on an annual basis, because you need to ensure that the fees that are being paid for your licensing service remain broadly cost neutral, and actually they're used to fund the service that is being provided. And of course that includes all elements of the Council. I know it's often asked, you know, which areas does it include? But it's pretty much everything, from the buildings to the staff in finance, your licensing officers, your senior directors, your legal team. So it's a whole raft of services which are provided by these fees and charges. So it's the responsibility to make sure that they are set at an appropriate level, and actually to cover the cost of the services being provided. So this annual review has taken place. It takes place, the senior officers, as mentioned, Kieran Lahal, the licensing manager, sits with your finance officers, and they literally go through every line of your fees and charges, and look at what would be an appropriate level to increase them if necessary. This takes place over the sort of summer months, and then finally comes to members in December once it's been finalised. Now, on this occasion, it has been deemed appropriate to increase fees and charges on the whole by 7.5%. Rounded up to the nearest pound. So that is the proposal being put forward. Members should note that there are a number of fees within your papers that you'll see that haven't changed. Some of them are set by central government. Your Licensing Act fees and charges are set by statute. Some of your Gambling Act fees and charges are also set by statute. But there are some which are within control of the Council, and those have also been increased where necessary, or the recommendation to increase them has been put forward. We have looked, there are one or two other sets of fees, and your animal licensing fees and scrap metal fees are one of them, where we've proposed not to increase those fees and charges. Now, the rationale behind this is because they are set at an appropriate level already. These are fees and charges which came in relatively recently, and were actually put together by Worcestershire Regulatory Services. So it's something that was done in consultation with certainly the other districts, and it's felt that these are set at an appropriate level to cover the cost for those particular areas of service. You'll remember that we introduced fees and charges earlier in the year in relation to your caravan function. These will take effect on the 1st of April, and again, they're included in the papers. Your taxi licensing fees, again, must remain broadly cost neutral, but there is a requirement to advertise vehicle licence fees and vehicle operator fees in the local press. So if there is a proposal to change them, which there is, and to increase them, there is a requirement to put forward a press notice and then consider any representations which are made in relation to those fees. The financial implications are contained within your report, and we've gone as far as to give an indication of the additional income that will be created by the increasing of the fees. Now, of course, the fees haven't been increased from, is it 2 years? Yes, certainly for the last 2 financial years. And of course, the council again is under financial pressure to look at all of its fees and charges and set them at an appropriate level. Unfortunately, the council isn't, or rather is, still subject to inflation, wage costs, and the cost of living is very relevant and is recognised. The legal implications, again, are contained within your report, as are the equality implications. And from looking at the Equalities Act, it's believed that certainly the increase in the fees and charges is below that of the current rate of inflation of approximately 10%, and therefore does not adversely affect or impact unlawfully discriminate any protected characteristics. As I say, it has been necessary on this occasion to increase fees and charges for those highlighted in the report, and that is the recommendation being put forward to members to certainly note the increase in fees and charges and the percentage, and undertake the consultation for the Hackney carriage and private hire fees and charges, which are also increasing. I'm happy to try and answer any questions if you have any, and also the licensing manager is here as well if there's any that I can't. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And ultimately, this will go as a recommendation to council in the budget making process. Okay. In the past, this has generated lots of questions from members about specific licensing fees. Are there any comments or questions tonight? Councillor Cronin.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one, really. Obviously, increasing with one eye on inflation makes absolute sense. I'm just conscious that when it comes to Hackney carriages, we do have control over the prices that trade actually passes on to the general public. And given that we're recognising, if we pass this, an increase of 7.6, 7.5%, will the same philosophy apply when we come to consider the tariffs that Hackney carriages charge and the rate per mile, etc.?
Hackney carriage fares is what you're referring to, is within the control of this council, certainly within the control of this committee. Now, in the past, as you're aware, a report came earlier in the year where fares were reviewed and increased, as it was recognised that they hadn't increased for a number of years. So certainly this committee recognised the importance of setting the fares at a level where the taxi drivers can make a living. Now, at that time, we did put a proposal in and gave an assurance that we would review the Hackney carriage fares on a more regular basis. I think we're going to be looking at them certainly once a year, unless, of course, we get a request from the trade in the meantime to increase them. And again, that philosophy, yes, it will stand that every year we will be looking at the Hackney carriage fares to make sure that they are set at an appropriate level. Again, we would expect certainly members of the taxi trade via the Taxi Forum to come forward with a proposal for discussion, which we did previously, and and then we would put it forward to this committee and any request for consideration. So long-winded answer, but I think the answer is yes.
But it's not directly part of this fees and charges process, is it?
No, they are two very separate matters, and you need to consider them separately. We're looking at the council's fees and charges in relation to the licensing service, and the Hackney carriage fares are very much well set by this committee, a separate matter to be determined separately.
And there is a potential within our work programme to do a review at some point in the future on a regular basis, as discussed earlier in the year. Yes. Okay, Councillor Craig.
Thank you for that. That's reassuring. My concern, obviously, is that, especially in the current circumstances, it does nobody any favours if the taxi trade gets squeezed in the middle of this, especially as we're shedding taxi. The taxi service is diminishing, has since the lockdown. I appreciate we looked sympathetically at this earlier in the year. That was sparked by the enormous increase in fuel prices, which has gone up further since then. Anyway, as you say, this is not really the time to go into that in detail, but that's reassuring. Thanks.
Are there any other comments or questions members may have? Councillor Hodgson? Mrs.
I'm just really just wondering about some of the other fees and charges, and whether or not perhaps some of the other ones should be increased in line with inflation.
I think the vast majority of fees and charges are planned to increase by 7.5%.
No, I'm looking at the ones which they haven't been increased.
Okay. I think I'll turn to Mr McManaman, but I believe there are some which we haven't got the ability to charge.
To increase.
Yes, I gave an explanation in the presentation when presenting the report to the rationale of why they hadn't been increased. So we're looking at possibly animal licensing charges and scrap metal dealer are the main two, and also your sex establishment charges. Those are the three that haven't been increased.
And also establish premise license for concerts and that sort of thing.
Yes, again, the explanation I gave at the beginning, some of the fees are set by statute. Yeah. So your Licensing Act fees and charges and your Gambling Act, a proportion of your Gambling Act fees and charges are actually set by government. So they are out of the control of the council when it comes to fee setting. I agree, it's quite frustrating that the government haven't seen it appropriate to actually review these fees and charges since they were introduced in 2003. So are they set at an appropriate level? The answer is probably no, to be able to recover the cost, but we're in a position where we unfortunately have no influence on those particular fees and charges. So as a council, you would be acting unlawfully if you were to attempt to try and increase those fees and charges. So certainly the recommendation is not to leave them well alone, is really what the officer's recommendation on those.
And can you clarify the issue about we can only set fees and charges which would recoup the money and costs incurred?
Yes, it's very much on a cost recovery basis. So it has to be, you cannot make a profit from your licensing service. So unfortunately, it can't be seen like other services within the council where it can be seen to bolster other areas. It's really just to deliver the service, for the licensing authority.
Thank you. Yes, I quite take your point about the government set fees and charges. And since they haven't really had a go at those since 2003, perhaps we should write to our members of parliament and ask them to lobby on our behalf, because we are experiencing quite a squeeze ourselves.
Is that a proposal which you
I
intend?
would propose that we do write to our member of parliament and ask them to
It's
lobby
not something
on
which I'd previously thought about, but it's probably a damn good idea. It's something I would normally suggest.
It's a long time since they really reviewed it, and I think we should ask them to.
I'm seeing nodding heads around the table, so if people are content with that, we can add that to the recommendations. There's nobody else who's indicated to speak. Can I seek approval for the recommendations with that addition? All those in favour? Thank you very much indeed. We now come on to the equalities debate, which was touched on earlier by Councillor Roberts, and I did ask for you to, if possible, refer to his comments in your comments as well. Ready?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if you'd like to all turn to page 21, this is agenda item number 6. This is a report which was requested from members and something we've been discussing certainly with the Chair and the Vice Chair of the committee in relation to supporting and updating members on where the Council currently is with their responsibility in relation to the Equalities Act. It was also an opportunity to update members on a new piece of legislation which came in earlier the year, which is, and I need to get the wording properly, it's the Taxi and Private Hire Disabled Persons Act 2022. So the report gives background information into the Equality Act itself and the section which is 165 and 167, which relates to hackney carriage and private hire drivers and their responsibilities. Now at that time, a report was presented to members which gave an update on this particular section of the Equalities Act. And the report goes on to give details about certainly the responsibilities on the hackney carriage and private hire trade and what they are expected to do when they're providing a service to all passengers, and including those who have disabilities. Now at that time, the new rules stated that councils could, so it was an option, maintain a list of vehicles which are designated as wheelchair accessible. That was something which we did, so we took that opportunity. Now, times have changed and it's now mandatory. So certainly the new legislation mandates that all councils must identify those vehicles which are deemed as wheelchair accessible. And again, I've provided a hyperlink in the report which takes you straight to your list of vehicles which are published. Now, we haven't gone as far as to include individual drivers' details, but it certainly shows the vehicles that are deemed as wheelchair accessible, and therefore these duties are requirements on those particular drivers. Now, all drivers have responsibility to act in accordance with the law. And the new legislation which has come out, so from June 28 of this year, the Disabled Persons Act has taken it one step further. What the Disabled Persons Act has done, it has amended and enhanced the Equality Act. So all of those responsibilities that were there before in relation to the carriage of persons who use wheelchairs, and also those who utilise assistance guide dogs, it's actually gone one step further. And the way I would explain it is that if a person identifies themselves as having a disability, then it's the responsibility of either the operator and the driver to go one step further. So they have to now assist with mobility aids. So whether that's walking sticks, canes, whether they have dogs, just assisting them into the vehicles. People with sight or visual impairments, if it's identified, then the driver should be getting out and trying to identify their passengers rather than sitting in the vehicles and waiting for them to be approached by the passengers. That's very much for vehicles which are on a booked basis. Likewise, on the rank, we would expect drivers to get out of their vehicles and assist passengers where it's appropriate. There is an exemption, as it's highlighted, but this isn't an exemption from carrying disabled passengers. So which is sort of, some people seem to think that, an exemption means I can't carry somebody in a wheelchair or I can't carry, with a mobility aid. It isn't. It just exempts that person from the responsibility to offer that assistance. So if they are not physically capable themselves to offer assistance, then should that person be able to get into the vehicle, there is still a legal requirement for them to take them. Councillor Roberts highlighted obviously an issue, and we're aware of sort of anecdotal information that's being passed forward to the council in relation to poor experiences that disabled passengers are having in the city. Councillor Roberts mentioned an individual who is a wheelchair user who's being passed along the line at the taxi ranks. if this is true, which I've no reason to disbelieve, it's very disappointing that this is happening, because all of the vehicles on the taxi rank or wheelchair accessible should be able to carry that passenger. Now, of course, what this report is highlighting is that it's actually an offence, you know, without good reason to be refusing a passenger in a wheelchair or any disabled person. It's an offence. You have a legal responsibility, or the drivers, to carry that passenger. So it is difficult, and I understand that individuals do not want to identify themselves. They want to bring it to the attention of the council, but because of the poor experience, they often feel that it's quite traumatic to either revisit what has happened to them, their experience. So what officers are planning on doing, we've had a lot of discussions. We've been working very closely with the Guide Dogs for the Blind, and we are putting in place, hopefully in the new year, something which we have been sort of raising discussions with the chair and vice chair about some test purchase exercises. So we'll be using individuals who are actually going along our taxi ranks to see and gauge what sort of experience they are having. And then we'll be bringing that information back, certainly to either licensing subcommittees or this committee, to show exactly what is happening, so we get a true picture of what's happening on our taxi ranks. This report really is just to show where we are currently at with regards to the legislation, the new legislation, and also what we are proposing to do to support the legislation and make sure that our drivers are fully aware of their responsibilities and are actually undertaking those responsibilities in relation to disabled passengers. I'm happy to answer any further questions. It is an information report. So over to you, Chair.
Okay. Lots of hands have gone up around the room. I want to start by saying that I am absolutely confident that the vast majority of our taxi drivers do behave responsibly, do look after disabled passengers, and do this already without actually having to be prompted. It clearly only takes one or two bad apples to rot the barrel, and that causes the problems which the rest of the industry is blamed for. So I would personally like to assure anybody listening that the whole industry isn't bad. It's one or two individuals who cause problems, and we should be aware of that. The first person to indicate was Councillor Hodgson.
I'd just like to know what training is being given and whether or not it's included in the handbook as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, the two appendices which are attached to your report are included now in the new taxi policy. So all drivers have access to it. They have been informed. They should have a copy of it, albeit electronically. So they should be fully aware of their responsibilities. Earlier in the year, we sent a newsletter to drivers, again reminding them their responsibilities under the Equality Act. And again, we will be sending further guidance in relation to the Disabled Persons Act. The training that is in place, certainly historically, we had driver training for disabled for drivers on disabled passengers and guide dogs when they can carry them and when they can't. Likewise with wheelchair users, some practical guidance. Again, this has been included in the new competency training that is given to all new applicants. But of course, if we do receive complaints, there is an option for the council to refer those drivers back for further training. So it's one of those things, if it is highlighted that there's a problem with certain individuals who probably either don't understand their responsibilities or if they refuse to actually take them seriously and don't take their responsibilities and follow the legislation, then there is an option for the council to take further action.
What about, so you talked about new taxi drivers, what about ongoing training for the taxi drivers? They might have had their licence for 2 or 3 years. What about training on for those sort of people?
Did you want to put that?
I'll take that one. Is it? Okay. Can you hear me? Yes, so that's something I'm looking into. Councillor is looking at training for current drivers as well. Obviously, the competency certificate does only deal with the training for new drivers, but we are in the background looking at a package of what kind of training that will look like.
When will that commence? Because obviously without training, not all people. Sorry, not all people. I know it's in the it's in the Hind book and everything else, but unless people have actual training, then there might be a loophole or something to say, well, I haven't been trained, therefore.
I think the best way to answer, best way to answer that very briefly is that we're talking about here the need to educate rather than persecute. And so the test purchases which will be taking place in the new year will be able to highlight to us what kind of education is needed and what is required and what kind of training will follow as a consequence. We're not talking about immediate prosecution, it's warning and education in that process.
Package for taxes so that the residents in Worcester can be satisfied that everybody's been trained.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. As the licensing manager mentioned, all new drivers are trained. All existing drivers were trained, sort of historically. We are looking at training and the review of training and a package for existing drivers. However, you need to bear in mind that there is a cost. So once licensed, we have deemed those drivers as fit and proper. So we want to support them, but we need to see how best to do that. What is the most appropriate training for them, so that that there isn't a significant cost in training, because it's not cheap. So that's what certainly the licensing manager is looking at, is the most appropriate sort of ongoing training that is available for drivers. Because it is difficult, it's a change of policy. If you're going to put in place sort of mandatory training, we can all put in place voluntary training, then again it's a review of policy. It's something which this committee would need to discuss and something which we would need to raise at the taxi forums.
Okay, Councillor Stephen?
I'd like to reinforce the point which was made by Councillor Andy Roberts earlier on. I've certainly got one Baton Hall resident who has complained to me about not being able to be picked up by private hire vehicles. She's registered disabled and blind and has a guide dog, and has struggled sometimes to be picked up and to get bookings. I know in her situation, she's really tried to complain, and I think she feels very frustrated that things so far haven't necessarily been seen on the ground. So I'm very appreciative of seeing this paper. I see it a very positive thing that we are doing it, but we do need to act on it. In the report, it makes quite a lot of mentions about wheelchair users, and it sort of singles them out. And I think that's an important category. But I think it'd be quite difficult to list the whole series of different types of disabilities. But having said that, I think we do have a large number of registered blind people in Worcester. And I think it would have been good in the report to have at least mentioned blind people in the report, because we do have so many people in Worcester with that. And of course, it brings on a whole series of issues to do with guide dogs and so on. And I think that's probably one of the main issues about taking the dogs, is one of the issues there. So what I would personally like to see is that this report actually have the addition of blind passengers actually explicitly mentioned in this report. I think we did mention it in the Chair and Vice Chair's briefing, but it hasn't actually arrived in the report. And so that's the first thing I would like to ask, possibly in section 2.2. But the other thing is and again, I really do welcome the idea of doing the mystery shopping. We can't rely on, our residents to do the policing for us. We should be being proactive on their behalf and providing a very good service for local residents. And I think many people who have got disabilities will potentially be vulnerable in themselves and may not have the physical and mental capacity to run the gauntlet of running a complaint and chasing it up and so on. And I think we really have to do a better job, I think, on picking these things up and being more proactive in actually taking these things up for them. So the last thing I would like to ask is that it mentions in the report about doing the mystery shopping. And what I'd love to see is that tightened up a little bit by putting a date by when that might happen, because putting it sometime in the future is great, but I'd love to see it with a date. Maybe our officer could perhaps give a date when this might have started at least. Thank you.
Firstly, just to touch on certainly the guide dog or assistance guide dogs. The report, yes, it mentions them. It doesn't go into detail, certainly in the actual body of the report, but I have attached an Appendix 2, our policy on assistance guide dogs. So it is there, it's very clear, you know, what is expected from taxi drivers and private hire drivers in Worcester. It's there in black and white, you know, what they need to do. So I did feel that it was in there. With regards to the mystery shopping exercises, again, unfortunately, we're at the mercy of, we're looking for assistance from an outside body so that we can get the best experience. Certainly just using members of the public may not be best who use assistance guide dogs. It's certainly a view that we've taken. So we've got people who've done this before in other areas to assist local authorities. So they know the process, and unfortunately we are at their mercy. They haven't given us a date, but I am in correspondence with them. And following this meeting tomorrow, I will email them again to try and get some dates in the diary. They did give me an assurance they are very keen to assist us, Worcester City, in these sort of test purchase exercises. So hopefully I'll be able to give you a date via email, certainly before the next committee. And hopefully they may have even been taken by the next committee.
Before I call Councillor Lawrence, Sian Stroud wishes to make a comment or two.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to endorse the idea that we're going to take an enlightened approach to this and try and get some experts to help us. And I think the idea that we are going to promote education, because in terms of the work that the council is doing on its own equality strategy, we recognise that things are quite complicated, actually. The conditions that people live with are quite complicated, and understanding and making the right judgments on the spot when you're, you know, operating a cab in dark, in a busy, rainy street, it's complicated as well. And we see that with other things that we're looking at on equalities. There are some very, yes, sophisticated decisions to make, you know, on the spot. So personally, I want to lend my support to this work and give you assurance, committee, that I want to get involved to make sure we have a programme of activity. We talk about training, we're concerned about budgets. We do have tremendous assets at our disposal to work with voluntary groups and the taxi groups. We've got this building we can open up in the evenings. There's a lot we can do without incurring a huge amount of cost. And I just want to emphasise that point, that in terms of the equalities and hidden disabilities generally, it's going to be a complicated picture, and we must recognise that and get stuck in, because it will take us a while.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence, then Councillor Agar.
Thank you, Chair. My point is, I do know someone else who's got a husband in a wheelchair, and she's been really struggling because, and I welcome the list, but it doesn't really help you contact the companies. So could there possibly be a list of the companies as well? I can understand why you might not want to have the individual taxi drivers, but there's no way of actually, you can see who the license is, but you wouldn't know how to get hold of them. So it gives you a chance, but doesn't give you that ability to reach. And possibly you don't want to do that for your licensing thing, but really, is there any way of doing that through another committee or bid or something? The taxis, perhaps through the forum, want to advertise their own services. It seems frustrating to have that list of them competent and no ability to contact them.
Yeah, that can be done. Certainly it's the operators who we're looking at here, who are quite happy to have their business and their telephone numbers and their addresses publicised for members of the public to contact them, because that's their job. Without their contact, you know, they wouldn't exist. The list that we have there is merely just providing it's the legal responsibility to identify the wheelchair accessible vehicles. So should we receive a complaint, then we would be able to go to that driver and say, it is your legal responsibility. And then that would prompt us to ask those further sort of difficult questions as to why sort of problems arose. So you're right, it doesn't identify the vehicles themselves and the drivers, but there shouldn't be any issue with us putting together the list of the operators with their telephone numbers and contact details. Something we haven't done previously, and I'm not sure that we do it sort of across the board, but certainly in there, on our public registers, I don't see any reason for going back and I'd probably need to ask their permission first under data protection, but I can't see any reason why they wouldn't agree to it.
Thank you very much.
Just a practical point, we can link from our accessible Worcester app as well, which is accessible in terms of buildings and premises and so on, but would be a source of information if you were planning your trip. So it would be a good place for us to link to that information too.
Councillor Agar.
Thank you. Some days I think I feel I must look a lot rougher than usual because people give up their seats on buses, and in the case of taxi drivers, they will insist on hauling my heavy shopping trolley up the long flight of steps to my home. So I meet with a great deal of courtesy and help, and that gives me not consolation. What's the word I'm really groping for? It makes me feel that they are in general a very well-meaning group of people, and that a great many disabled people would meet with a great deal of courtesy and assistance. But I think Sian's idea that we should really work with local organisations that have that complexity of experience is a good one. Because, if we just look at one example of a disability, which is somebody with serious sight impairment, if they wanted to make a complaint, it would have to be a rather general one because they wouldn't be able to see the driver's badge or identify a driver who'd actually been unpleasant or difficult. And that driver couldn't be offered that training. It would have to be on a fairly general basis. So, the mystery shopper kind of idea is a good one. And that's probably the nearest we can get to it. I do wonder, hopefully, some of the organisations will have better ideas on how we tackle that.
Yeah, I think we also have to remember and be aware that not all disability is visible. And I can think of two immediately, ME and fibromyalgia, which is incredible exhaustion on behalf of passengers, but it's not necessarily appearance. It's not necessarily noticeable by appearance. So that can create other tensions and stresses in its own right. And I am absolutely confident, once again, what I said earlier, that the vast majority of drivers do behave and do help. It's just getting to those who don't understand or don't want to understand the consequences of not doing so. A classic example, one many members will know, I used to take part in visually impaired rugby. And we had to actually, in the end, send our own cars to Forgate Street Station because the number of times visually impaired rugby players with their guide dogs were refused access to a taxi. So we had to pick them up ourselves, which was actually bad business for the taxi business industry as well. I would hope those days are now over and gone, and that we can actually be assured that there will be full cooperation. But Mystery Shopper will show us what the situation is out there and whether there is actually any more education or training which is required. And it has been whispered to me earlier that it may help with disability charities, also if they had some sort of assistance card which could be shown to demonstrate the disability of the individual and what assistance would be required. The best one in the world, taxi drivers are not doctors and or brain readers, mind readers. So there's an opportunity there for others to actually help them in their job. Is there anything else anybody wishes to add? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering as well, it takes some time to safely load a wheelchair passenger. Are they allowed to book waiting time, or is it not part of the journey cost?
No, it isn't. That's something that's set out certainly in the Equalities Act. Disabled passengers shouldn't be charged any more than able-bodied passengers, just simply because they have a disability and because they have to be loaded either a wheelchair into the vehicle or a mobility aid or the assistance with a door. The meter shouldn't be started until the journey starts. So that's something just to hopefully everybody takes that away with them. So if you receive any complaints of that nature, by all means ask them or forward them on to WRS inquiries.
Thank you very much for confirming that.
This report is for noting. Are we happy to note and look forward to some further information after the test purchases have taken place? Thank you very much. Agenda item 7, page 31, Niall.
Thank you. It's me again. Yep. So, this is a proposal to apply a fees and charges exemption for Hackney Carriage and private hire electric vehicles. Councillors, the background to this report is, as you know, this City Council has declared a climate emergency, and that was done in 2019. And as a council, we are committed to making the city carbon neutral by 2030. To support this ambition, the council has developed and published the Worcester City Environmental Sustainability Strategy 2020-2030. So it goes on to explain how the council is going to reduce its carbon emissions from its own operations. It also sets out the council will use its leadership role to help individuals and businesses and also communities to play their part. Now, one of the focus areas is transport. So obviously this committee has responsibility, or the council has responsibility as a licensing authority over Hackney Carriage and private hire vehicles. And so one of those aims is to work with local taxi operators to facilitate the transition to zero emission taxis. So from fossil fuels to zero emission taxis. The council is working or attempting to work with other district councils, certainly within Worcestershire, and meetings are proposed to take place very shortly to try and put together a sort of a central strategy so that we're not all working in isolation. We've all got the same goals. We see it from WRS because we obviously service the licensing service for all 6 district councils, and every one of those councils is in exactly the same position. They all, their aim is to be carbon neutral and to lead the way in sort of zero emissions. So certainly, where are we at the moment within Worcestershire? At a recent taxi forum meeting with representatives of the city's taxi trade, this matter was discussed. So we had other people there, obviously the chair and vice chair of the licensing committee and West Mercia Police, and we all sat round and we discussed the issue of electric vehicles, or rather vehicles and fossil fuel vehicles still being used on the fleet. So it was clear, certainly when talking to the trade, and there's a number at the back of the room today, that the main obstacle for the transition to sort of carbon neutral vehicles is the cost. It's the cost of those vehicles. There are other issues, you know, range anxiety, those sort of issues where they're concerned about the charge of vehicles. But the main concern is the cost of the vehicle. So we were looking as a council to try and incentivise the taxi trade to get to encourage that transition, to try and get some early adopters, to get some people to look at various different vehicles, and this is one way that we thought may be a positive. So in your report, it gives details of the cost of new vehicles, and certainly wheelchair accessible vehicles in the range of £45 as a starting price, and certainly going up to best part of £70,000. We do have a mixed fleet, and again we give details in the report of the sort of the difference. And again, our sort of saloon type vehicles are you're looking at a cost again of probably around £30,000 for new or maybe 3-year-old vehicles. So it is quite significant, and it is recognised. There was a task and finish group which was put forward to look at this issue, and again, you know, the costs were highlighted as the main barrier. So it's certainly something that's been discussed. But we did think that it was time, certainly at the taxi forum and conversations with the chair and vice chair, to certainly take some sort of action rather than just sitting back and waiting for something to happen. It wasn't really an option. So we have taken the decision to introduce a fee waiver for any prospective new private hire vehicles and any existing licence holders under the Hackney Carriage licensing scheme to replace their vehicles, to waiver the fee for fully electric vehicles. Now at 3.8, we put in some proposed costings that will certainly benefit the trade. Yes, they are probably not as significant as we would like them to be, but the costs to the council, when we examine sort of grants or subsidies, was quite significant. So finding that sort of money really wasn't an option at that time, and I'm not sure it is at the moment with the current financial situation that there is. So we've tried to do what we can as a starter. So this really is a starter of a proposal that we think may assist the trade, and certainly any who are already considering purchasing an electric vehicle, because they are out there. I was in Birmingham at the weekend, and there were plenty of electric vehicles being driven in the city centre, and in other districts they've taken a similar sort of proposal and put it forward, and there are one or two members of the trade who are taking it up, so hopefully we'll start to see the benefits. The proposal being put forward is for 10 vehicles each year to benefit from a fee waiver, so they will be able to benefit thereafter for the following 2 years. So it's a 3-year proposal for an individual who wishes to take advantage of it. As I mentioned, we do currently have a cap on the number of Hackney carriage vehicles of the council, and we're not proposing to increase the number of vehicles on our streets. So it's very much for any drivers who are looking to replace their existing vehicles. We haven't got a cap on private hire vehicles, but certainly, again, we would look very favourably on those sort of vehicles coming in, new vehicles, or replacing existing vehicles being put forward. So let's have a look at the main elements. Obviously, if this is something which the council feels is a good idea, and we're looking forward to certainly this committee recommendation, there will be a requirement for us to advertise the fees, like with earlier on with the fees and charges. There is a requirement under section 70 of the Local Government Act for the council to advertise those particular fees. So we will certainly make sure that happens, and then look at any comments that come back. We are working, so at the recent taxi forum, I think at 3.18, it's very clear that we do need to look at a date when fossil fuel vehicles won't be licensed by this council, and that is something that we're not proposing a date just yet, but it's something that is being looked at. It's high on the agenda. Other district councils are actually looking at setting dates when they will no longer accept vehicles that utilise fossil fuels. The report highlights that certainly the new sale of vehicles, I think it's 2030, the government have set a date, that no new vehicles will be sold after that date, petrol or diesel, and then that will go on even further. Then I think it's 2040 where no vehicle sales at all will be either petrol or diesel. So we need to bear in mind that whilst these dates seem a long time away, quite far in the distance, they come around fairly quickly. Certainly 2030 isn't a million miles away for us to start considering this now. A review of the current Hackney carriage and private hire vehicle age policy. That is one of the things that we will be looking at, obviously to assist this transition. But certainly in the taxi forum, it was discussed or put forward by the taxi trade that we should go one step further and help them at this stage by reviewing the existing Hackney carriage trade. So the proposal is to remove age limits for electric vehicles completely, so that there isn't a barrier to bring those onto the fleet at the stage. But the members of the trade have put forward a suggestion, or certainly a proposal, that the council should be reviewing their existing Hackney carriage age policy and increasing the maximum age. So the introductory age of vehicles at the moment is the maximum age is 3 years. So they're looking to increase that to 5 years, and that will assist them in getting the money together and certainly their finances in order to then support electric vehicle purchases in the future. I mean, you need to consider this very seriously, and it's not a proposal as such in this report, but it's there for consideration. That this is very much financially led. So when considering any change in policy, you need to go and consider all sorts of other factors, such as improvements in passenger safety, comfort, possible lack of vehicle availability, limited types of vehicles, or vehicle types and improvements to equality issues. We had a report just on equality matters, so to just simply change age limits for financial reasons, it needs probably more consideration. So as I've mentioned, it would need further consideration. Any change to either the fees and charges and also vehicle ages would require consultation. That's a formal consultation. Even further, it will be a stakeholder and public consultation to get the views of all parties. So with that in mind, we are looking to sort of put something together, certainly in relation to the electric vehicle side of things, as soon as possible. And it's something that we're looking to sort of get out and bring back to the next committee. I mean, the preferred option is there, and I'm going to read it out probably in its entirety, is for the current light vehicle licensing fees in respect of Hackney carriage and private hire vehicles to be exempt for 3 years for those drivers purchasing and licensing fully electric vehicles. So that is the option being put forward. That is the main purpose of this report. In considering this, it will provide an incentive for Hackney carriage and private hire drivers and businesses to consider the purchase of fully electric vehicles when upgrading their vehicles and aid to the decarbonisation of the Hackney carriage and private hire fleet. It is proposed that the fee exemption be introduced for the initial 3-year period, with an annual review to take place each year, so that officers can monitor the impact and the take-up of the option to waiver the fee, and then report back to committee at a later date. As an added incentive to assist drivers preparing for the purchase of vehicles, again, this is an option for the council, on certainly this committee today, to explore the option of amending the vehicle age policy that vehicles up to the age of 5 years could be licensed, thus reducing the driver's financial outlay and assisting them to save ahead of either the national or cut-off point of fossil fuel vehicles in the future. So that's the preferred options being put forward. So certainly the waiver of the licensing fees for 10 vehicles for a period of 3 years. Sorry, so it's 30 vehicles in reality. And also the point to start reviewing the age limit of vehicles. Alternative options offers an exemption for just the initial first application fee. Given the current costs of electric vehicles, it's felt that this offer alone would provide little or no incentive to drive. So just to do it for 1 year will probably be not enough, not going far enough as a council. Also, because any vehicle fee, as I mentioned in the reports earlier, the licensing fees actually fund the service. So any shortfall will need to be funded from the council itself, or by increasing the charges on the licence holders. So there is a proposal to put in a nominal cost as an administrative charge. Again, it's in there, it's relatively low, but this could possibly be seen as sort of undermining the message that's being put forward and trying to encourage people to take on electric vehicles. The financial implications are in the report. We've listed the current cost of vehicles and vehicle licences. Also, the possible fees, the loss of income that will take place over the next 3-year periods if all 10 licences were taken up each year. So that is highlighted in the report. Again, the cost of advertising, the council's fees and charges, it's a standard cost that is taken or borne by Worcestershire Regulatory Services. The legal implications and governance implications, again, contained in reports. I don't propose to go through them. We've covered them already. I'm not sure there's anything else I can add that I've said already. So there was a lot of information, a lot of talking. Sorry, councillors. So happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there are two aspects, some very important aspects of this report for us to consider. One is whether we want to make a referral to the Environment Committee, and the chair of the Environment Committee is here, and I'm sure he will hear the comments which are being made. And two, whether we wanted to go out to further consultation as discussed. I think it's an ambition of this committee and most of us here around this table to go for, at some time in the near future, an all-electric fleet for our taxis. As has been said, a year hasn't been agreed or suggested, but I've heard suggestions around 2030. I think that's going to be tough and difficult, but I think it could be achievable. But we'd need to do our role as a committee and as elected members to actually assist the taxi trade in order to get there. And this is part of the suite of measures which could be put forward in order to establish that and make that possible. The taxi trade have told us what they want to do and how we can help them achieve that. And one of those ways is the 3 to 5 years age rule. And I think that's a reasonable request which they've made. And we're certainly one worthy of consideration as long as the vehicle meets obvious minimum standards. So I'm content with that as a way forward. I'm not sure if Councillor Stephen wishes to add anything else to support the proposal.
Yes, I would. There's a number of issues as well to add on to that. We are in sort of a catch-up mode with our neighbouring local authorities who already done this before us. There are, as has been mentioned, there's a number of different issues for why people will not take up electric vehicles. Some of this is down to range anxiety, but some of this is down to lack of charging points and so on. It's with all these things, I think you've got a chicken and egg situation. Unless people start having a lot more electric vehicles, we won't have enough charging points. You're not going to create a whole lot of charging points if you haven't got a lot of electric vehicles. So some point somewhere, someone's got to start to break that link. And we've got just over 300 taxis and private hire vehicles in Worcester. So I think this is a fairly modest but significant step in the right direction by saying we will have up to 30 of the vehicles. That will be up to something like, approaching something like 10% of the fleet being electric vehicles within 3 years. And that will allow us then to monitor it, see how it goes, to see whether there is enough electric vehicle charging points, to see how well they work, where they don't work, without going full-blown into a massive conversion into EVs. It allows the council and the city to see how it works in a very gentle way, and it doesn't keep pushing it away. It's a very difficult thing to do, and it's always going to be difficult to do, but unless you start somewhere, you're never going to get started. I think we've got to just make the first initial point. And I think the other thing that's worth saying is that we are under significant financial pressure as a council, and we've really got to recognise that. So although we might say, oh, well, we'd love to see all the taxis being EVs and be able to do everything, by putting this fairly modest limit of saying 10 EVs per year for the next 3 years, it does put a cap on the cost to the council, which I think is very useful for us in this time of quite difficult financial difficulties for the council. So I think to strike the right balance of getting things moving, not pushing it away, making a start, allowing the early adopters and the brave people who will be the first people who will get their first electric vehicles to actually prove the business model, so then the other taxi drivers can then come forward. So I think it's been quite well thought of. It's been quite well discussed within the taxi trade. I'd love to see this being given at least a try. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got 4 speakers in this order: Councillor Lawrence, Mitchell, Hodgson, Mr. and Cronin. Councillor Lawrence first.
Thank you, Chair. I was also wondering, how will it work for the electric vehicles, which I welcome them coming, but they will need to charge perhaps on the taxi rank? How would they keep their space, for instance? Has that been considered? Will they be getting separate ranks? Will we have to rethink the way a taxi rank works to permit electric vehicles to be used?
It's certainly the charging infrastructure is something that needs consideration, but we need to actually take action at the current time. Now, other local authorities have had government funding, special charging plates for vehicles, all sorts of things that are taking place. We're not that lucky, unfortunately. We haven't got any funding. We haven't got any availability. We have got very limited space for new ranks in the city. We're aware of this. Most vehicles these days, or certainly the electric vehicles, can do somewhere in the region of 250 miles on a full charge, which, the taxi drivers will be able to tell us whether that will be adequate, whether they will need to take a break and then recharge their vehicles. But this is really just to get the ball rolling. Let's get the electric vehicles out there. The technology is increasing all of the time. And certainly I looked at a vehicle that was licensed in another district, and that's sort of quoting somewhere in the region of 280 mile range. on a full charge. One thing we need to bear in mind is we have focused on electric vehicles. There are other options, hydrogen, but the technology at the moment is there for electric vehicles, which is why we thought that it's most appropriate to make the start and sort of, play catch up with our neighbours who have already sort of taken the steps to put in place sort of a fee waiver for electric vehicles.
Personally, I would like to see curbside electric vehicle charging points, but that's not within our power, and I'd certainly continue to lobby elsewhere for the changes to enable that to happen. Did you want to come back, or?
I was just wondering if that possibly could be something that you could write to the county council about.
I regularly write to the county council about that subject. I'm happy to do so again. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. To answer one of Councillor Stevens' questions, we were across at the university only last week doing it. There's the 100-odd charging points going up in that car park, which will be online within the next few months. So I think there's plenty of places to charge. I am not anti-environment, and cars will become electric. I'm just sorry, but I see this as really a hollow gesture. If you do the maths, it just doesn't make sense. The only people who are going to take advantage of this are those taxi drivers who are actually quite wealthy and therefore can jump on it, and they'll save themselves 1,200 quid over the next 3 years. If you're buying a £45,000 car and you're going to take a loan, say over 4 years, it's £1,000 a week, £1,000 a month repayment, and we're offering them 1,200 quid. We can't afford, the taxi drivers have to make their own way there. We don't have, as a council, the funding of flexibility, in my view, to be offering up £37,000. And I'd be really interested to see what the taxi drivers think, because 1 minute we're saying we need to help them out, extend the life of any car entry at five years, and then we're saying, by the way, go and spend 70 grand on a taxi. I just don't see how it financially stacks up to be attractive. I'm happy to be proven wrong, and if we get a take-up of 10 people, then that's 10 more EV taxis on the road. Great. I just don't think it will go anywhere. If it was me, I like to think I'm a reasonably astute businessman, I'd only be doing it if I could afford to do it, and then I'd be saving 1,200 quid. But if you can't afford to do it, which we're hearing that, price of fuel's gone up, can we extend the taxes? I just don't think we'll get the take up. But hey ho, I'm not going to be a Grinch. I'm happy to support it. I just think it's, I don't think we'll get much of a take up, but happy to be proven wrong.
Maybe because the price of fuel has gone up, it might be a very attractive proposition. However, I'm not going to enter into a discussion and argument with you on this at this stage. I think that might be for others to do. Councillor Hodgson, Mister.
Yes, introduction of electric vehicles. Yes, somebody who works in distribution, we've been talking about introduction of electric vehicles for many years, particularly if you're doing shop deliveries in urban areas and that. So it's entirely logical, therefore, to move it over to the field of taxis. What I would say about this is you've got, obviously, compulsory electric vehicles coming in by about 2030, which actually isn't that far ahead. And when you think about the light vehicles, people who are now buying vehicles now are probably will be the last ones who are buying new petrol one as they come in. So really, if we'd have this policy, it's really to encourage early adopters. And because we can't provide funding for everybody with an electric vehicle, I would suggest it needs to be focused on the hackney trade, which is more likely to be vehicles that are going to be used more intensively in terms of a taxi trade compared to a private hire vehicle that might not be used as regularly. Also, by the very nature, hackney vehicles are used more in the city centre environment, and that is really where a vehicle that is not putting out emissions where you don't want them to work, because that is really what electric vehicles are at the end of the day. They are the advantages. They are vehicles that are not going to put emissions in places where you want them, near schools, near where people are walking and that sort of thing. So I think from that point of view, I think you have to think about it in terms of, making sure that the electric vehicles we do subsidise, if we are going to use them, they are the vehicles that are going to be used intensely, and not people who are going and to encourage people who who are replacing their vehicles now, to encourage them to make the choice of going for electric rather than going for a petrol. And really, that is what the point of the policy is, to encourage that particular choice. And what I would say as well is regarding charging capability, I mean, obviously, we're increasing our public charging capacity. A new charging capacity increased all the time, and also really people as well who are owners of electric vehicles, they will also be providing their own charge as well, which is another thing that has to be considered as well. Not everybody who has a Hackney light vehicle necessarily lives in the sort of properties that are suitable to have electric vehicles at home. Like if you go around, the cathedral ward and that, where people have got Hackney cars parked outside their houses. Some of them are terraced houses where you can't put in charging thing. So obviously those users are going to have to be mindful of where they're going to charge their vehicles and that. But I do think it is I think it is a policy that does have wheels, if you excuse the pun, and therefore hope you'll consider what I've just said. Thank you.
I've got a lot of sympathy with what you've been saying, Councillor Hodgson, and I think that what I was whispering to the officer by the side of me when you were speaking and summing up was, I think that any consultation exercise which we have with the trade and others will be coming back to us for further before implementation. I think that might be an issue which we'll consider when it comes back to us in March. I've got Councillor Cronin and Councillor Stafford.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, the whole motor industry is facing a very difficult transition, especially right now with the cost of electric vehicles. And I think the sense behind this proposal is good because it provides some incentive to the trade to bring forward the transition from the standard vehicles to electric vehicles. I do think this proposal is actually fairly modest. We're looking at 10 vehicles a year for a maximum of 3 years. It's not a particularly significant number of the vehicles in the city, but it's a start. 3 years from now is too far ahead to anticipate. Hopefully, electric vehicles will have become a bit cheaper by then. But we may be in a position where we decide it's wise to extend this, the lifting of these fees. There has been assumption in the views that have been expressed around the room that the cost of this will be borne by the council. I know that in your presentation, Niall, you did actually mention that there was an alternative, which is for the remainder of the fleet to absorb these costs. And I've just done a quick calculation, and the cost of £37,000, that's cost over 3 years. So that's 12,000 a year. If we were not prepared to absorb this as a cost on the council and to transfer it onto the rest of the taxi trade, it would mean an increase of £40 or £50 per vehicle. So, these aren't enormous figures that we're looking at. £37,000 is not a particularly significant cost on the council. And I think it's a reasonable thing to be considering as an introductory measure. I do think that moving forward, we certainly should be looking to transfer the costs onto the remainder of the fleet in a few years' time, because we're going to need to enhance the incentive to move over from traditional vehicles to electric vehicles. But that's some years away. In the meantime, looking at adjusting the age criteria of buying vehicles, I think is an absolutely sensible thing to do. We're now in 2022. If we're looking to have an all-electric fleet by 2030, the vehicles that are purchased in the next few years will more than likely be completely obsolete in 8 years' time. So we need to be considerate of the impact that that'll have on people who have to buy their vehicles in this transition period and are unable to put their hand on the funds required to go straight to an electric vehicle. I think this is good as far as it goes. I think Louis used the word modest. I think that is an accurate description of what we're doing. And I think we need to keep this under review, and we'll be revisiting the issue of age criteria at the next meeting, I understand. So, by and large, I'm in favour of this. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Stafford.
It's been so long waiting, I wasn't sure how to work the speaker anymore. Yeah, I just wanted to add my support to this, and just an update from the Environment Committee where we are, in addition to the sort of 50 kilowatt chargers that are at St Martin's Gate, which obviously could provide a rapid charge during the day in minutes for taxis. We're also looking at putting chargers into Tallow Hill, which will support daytime charging, overnight charging, and also King Street. So there are additional charging infrastructure that's in progress. And then the other thing I wanted to add, it'd be interesting to know whether there's any sort of lessons to be learned from areas that are further ahead from us, and whether there's opportunities for particular companies that sort of want to move quicker to sort of badge themselves as eco cabs, or as such maybe generate a potential business model from actually having a fleet of electric vehicles that differentiate themselves from the rest, that large members of the public might choose to pick ahead of competitions. And I suppose if they were private hire, I understand they'd be able to set their own fees, so you could potentially charge a small premium for an eco cab, and some people may be very well inclined to pay that. Okay.
It's certainly something that has happened in other areas. So they are actively promoting themselves as green companies, and they have electric vehicles. So it is down to the certain individual license holders to come up with their business model. But you're right. I mean, it certainly seems like an option. One thing we do anticipate, certainly over the next 2 to 3 years, is the second-hand market in electric vehicles, more vehicles being available. Now, early adopters of electric vehicles, through policy mainly, and certainly Hackney carriage vehicles, is the City of London. If you go to the City of London, there's a whole row and rows and rows of electric vehicles all waiting at the city's taxi ranks. That's because it's been forced upon them, so they've had to do it. Those vehicles will become available, and they'll be on the second-hand market, certainly when they look to replace them. So we do envisage the cost of electric vehicles and the second-hand market, the cost actually coming down. So that is one thing that we'll start to see, certainly in the next few years, is the second-hand market. Likewise with saloon-type vehicles, the electric vehicles at the moment, which, you know, are maybe a year old, 2 years old, again, can be considered for licensing with the council. You know, it's there, it's an option. One thing with regards to the finances, and probably I didn't highlight properly in the reports, I mentioned that from other reserves. The idea is the shortfall, any shortfall will be taken from within the taxi reserves initially. So that's highlighted in the report at 6.4. So that's where the initial money will be coming from to fund this scheme, should it be taken up by the taxi drivers, to its fruition, which is the full 30 vehicles over the, well, it will be 6 years, won't it?
Okay, I think it's fair to say that there's agreement for this proposal to go ahead, but I'll take a show of hands in a minute. Councillor Bonds, did you want to come in? Or? Councillor Bonds, Councillor Lake, I haven't seen you indicating, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I see 2030 as potential cliff edge where we could see a lot of taxi drivers walking away at that stage because they won't be able to fulfil their obligations. Now, we already have problems enough with the buses not running, but for taxis to go as well is going to be a massive problem for people who rely on public transport. And I think probably we need to have some kind of report to identify ways forward, whether it's by creating taxi cooperatives, whatever it needs to happen so that we can actually have a functioning public transport system going forward.
I think Councillor Barnes has a really interesting point there, and it's something we need to look at seriously, because infrastructure as well as the cost to individuals is going to be huge. And I'm really relieved to hear that you're going to lobby in another place a lot more, because I don't think the other place is doing enough. You know, we really do need that infrastructure, and a lot more of it when you consider the sheer number of cars on the roads generally. And they'll want to use this infrastructure too. And one of the things we found out when we visited the university site the other day was they'd actually put in a new substation as well, or was it 2 substations? Something like that. So there's a lot that needs to go on, and we need to work with partners, and it's not going to happen quickly. So we need to get started, and I think this is a great starting point. It's all we can do at the moment, apart from lobbying.
I do apologise to both of you. I honestly didn't see hands indicating. This is going to go to the Environment Committee at its next meeting. It's going to come back to us in March for further consideration after consultation, and I can guarantee you there will be further items coming back to this committee and elsewhere in the weeks, months and years ahead in order to help with the transition process towards an all-electric fleet by a date sometime in the future to be determined. I think it's essential that we have to get there, but it's more essential that we work with the taxi industry in Worcester and the taxi trade in order to work in partnership with them to actually get there, because without them it's not going to be achievable. So we'll be looking forward to that kind of work and cooperation in the future. I'm looking forward to actually seeing that all-electric fleet, and hopefully we'll be part of it, working at it together. Can I see a show of hands in favour of this recommendation? We are unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. We'll now move on to the last item for us today, which is the taxi rank enforcement report, which was requested by Councillor Cronin at the last meeting. Is there anything you wish to add to the report?
No, Chair. Other than the title itself was probably a little bit misleading. It's general enforcement, so it's not just Hackney Carriage and private hire enforcement. It's an enforcement from the council, from both the licensing team and also the civil enforcement team. So it's very much the enforcement of traffic regulations, Hackney Carriage and private hire conditions and regulations within the city. So the report just highlights certainly what's taken place in the last few months, and certainly throughout the year when we've been educating drivers and other people on the requirements and what we expect. It came off the back, certainly Councillor Cronin was keen. I think the drivers came to previous meeting and in the public participation section were concerned about certain areas, misuse of the ranks by members of the public and other businesses such as delivery drivers, but also we're fully aware of articles in the press in relation to our own Hackney Carriage and private hire drivers parking inappropriately in and around the city. So the report goes some way to inform members of what's been taking place.
Councillor Cronin, you requested this report. Is there anything you wish to ask or add?
I'm very pleased to have got it. Thank you very much for responding to my request. The motivation for the request was certainly my experience, just as a member of the public who walks around and sees what happens, is the routine misuse of taxi ranks by members of the public. And since I raised the issue, I've made more of a point of actually physically noting these things. It's still going on. I'm very pleased to see that we are now sending our CEOs out, and particularly in the evening time when people think that they can do this without any consequences. We've had some members of the committee will be aware of the nightclub in town actually closing off a taxi rank with cones to use it for their own private use, which thankfully we've brought that to an end. But that rank was routinely occupied by private vehicles until the time when it was illegally coned off. These are the sort of routine abuses that have been going on under the eyes of the general public and the taxi trade who are trying to use these ranks, but have not been enforced. I'm delighted that we are enforcing these now, and long may it continue. I shall carry on bringing these issues to attention of the relevant people. If we do see an upsurge in this sort of abuse, I should be lobbying for an enhanced level of enforcement in future. In the meantime, I'm very pleased that we've had this response, and it would be great to think that it had brought the problem to an end. It hasn't, but it's a step in the right direction.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or queries or questions? There being none, thank you very much for your attendance here this evening. It's just gone 8:30. I wish you a safe journey home. I'm sure there are some taxis available for people who need to get home at some point. There are no taxis available, are they shaking their heads? Well, I look forward to them becoming available in a few minutes. But thank you very much for your attendance here this evening. I wish you a safe journey home and a wonderful Christmas. Have a nice time.